Ammon and Jacob was actually able to save his family, his brothers, because of the political stature that he had in Egypt. So his whole family came to Egypt. And the Bible tells us that God blessed those people. They grew and they flourished. The Bible actually gives us numbers where we can do the math and figure out they went from a handful of people to just thousands and thousands, probably a couple of million people living in Egypt. Had a little political turnover. They began to outnumber the Egyptians. So what happens in a situation like that is usually in ancient times, they were made slaves. They were enslaved to the Egyptians, forced to work, build pyramids, things like that. Well, that brings us up to a fellow named Moses that I think we pretty much remember. God sent Moses to deal with Pharaoh, to say, let my people go, let them leave Egypt. You remember studying about Moses in Sunday school in Awana? And eventually, through a series of plagues, God was able to convince Pharaoh that he might want to let his people go. Moses took them out into the wilderness. They didn't exactly go a direct route, but they came to the edge of the promised land, and they went out on God, didn't they? They didn't have enough faith to do what God said. So what happened? They wandered for 40 more years in the desert. Moses died. Joshua's now in command. Under Joshua, these people have a second chance to take this land that God has promised them. And this is pretty much where the story of Achan starts. God's chosen people are ready to take the promised land. Their faith is stronger than it was 40 years ago. Something about wandering around eating manna for about 40 years and then glutting yourself on quail for a while. That'll help your faith improve. As they come into the promised land, their first battle is going to be with a city known as Jericho. Jericho was quite possibly the most intimidating city that they were going to come up against. They were well fortified, well armed, big city, big walls. You probably remember the story about the walls of Jericho. Probably heard those before in Awana in Sunday school. God gave them the strangest military advice you've ever heard. He said, go out, march around the city. One time. 6 days. Seventh day, going to march around the city how many times? Anybody remember? 7. 7 times around the city. The first few times they marched around, the first 6 days, they were quiet, weren't they? Didn't make a lot of racket. But on the 7th day, they march around that 7th time, and then they let out a big war whoop, don't they? Breaking pots and pans, different pottery things, hooting and hollering. And what happened to the walls? Boom, they crashed. I guess to make a long story short, Israel conquered Jericho, didn't they? Took them out, wiped them out, took their city. God gave real specific instructions on how they were to do it. And some of those instructions might not have seemed terribly important at the time, but now let's be real. Does God ever say anything that's not important? I don't think He does. There's a verse tucked away in Joshua chapter 6 that at least one man didn't take heed of when they were going through these instructions. Joshua chapter 6, if you would follow along with me, verse 18. Joshua 6:18. The Bible says, but as for you only, keep yourselves from the things under the ban, lest you covet them and take some of the things under the ban, so that you would make the camp of Israel accursed and bring trouble on it. Let me explain to you what that's talking about. Under the ban. In this period of history, it was common practice for an army, when they had defeated someone, to go in basically, I'm going to call it steal. Steal everything that was of value. They would take gold, silver, animals. If they defeated you, anything you had that they wanted, they would take. And the word for that's called spoil. God told them not to do that. God wanted the people to understand this battle was about fulfilling a promise for them to have land. It wasn't for them to go and line their pockets. That's not what was going on. But guess what? There's just one man that didn't get it, and you can probably guess his name because it's up there. Achan thought he could disobey God and nobody would know it. Thought he was going to just slide it right past the people. You know, God knew, and before the story ends, a whole lot of other people knew it as well. In Joshua chapter 7, verse 1, the Bible says, "But the sons of Israel acted unfaithfully in regard to the things under the ban." He banned them from taking spoil. "For Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zereth, from the tribe of Judah, took some of the things under the ban. Therefore the anger of the Lord burned against the sons of Israel." Israel being God's chosen people. Question was asked in the video, does it matter if I sin and nobody else knows it? Well, I think they answered it pretty well, but the answer is, yeah, I think so. In chapter 7, it tells us that after they defeated this mighty fortified city known as Jericho, their soldiers next went to this small, weak, wimpy little town known as Ai. It's almost like, say this church were to decide that we're God's chosen people, that we're going to go to battle. So we go and we defeat the Soviet Union, China, all at one time. Biggest group of people in the world. We're going to attack them, and we just beat them. That's what it's equivalent to when they whooped Jericho. Now, when they go and fight Ai, it's almost like we decide, let's go and attack La Petite Academy, where a bunch of 2- and 3-year-olds are staying. Okay? This is something they could do with one hand tied behind their back, right? But they're out of God's will. John, you guys know what happened to them at Ai? John, show them the second screen. You get the picture? Ai kicked Israel's hiney. It was a very humiliating defeat. How could they have lost a battle to such a wimpy little town? They didn't even have walls. Probably didn't even have a standing army like Jericho. And the Bible talks about how far Ai drove Israel from their town. I mean, it was humiliating. And Joshua, their leader, he was devastated. He could not understand what happened until God told him. In Joshua chapter 7, verse 11, the Bible says, this is God telling Joshua what happened. "Israel has sinned, and they have also transgressed my covenant, which I commanded them. And they have even taken some of the things under the ban, and have both stolen and deceived. Moreover, they have also put them among their own things." In other words, somebody took spoil, somebody robbed the defeated people, and they weren't supposed to, and they've taken this stuff to their house, and they're hanging on to it. God went on to tell Joshua how to find who committed this sin, and it was kind of a long, drawn-out process. Using the different tribes and the family units, he'd have them come one at a time before Joshua, and he showed them which tribe, and it was Judah. And then it went through all the different clans that we saw that Achan was part of. God showing him which one, kind of keep making it a smaller group, until finally God revealed it that it was Achan that had brought this on. In verses 19 and 21, the Bible says, "Then Joshua said to Achan, 'My son, give glory to the Lord, the God of Israel, and give him the praise. Tell me what you have done. Do not hide it from me.' Achan replied, 'It is true. I have sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel. That is what I have done. When I saw the plunder, a beautiful robe from Babylonia, 200 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them, and I took them. They are hidden in the ground inside my tent with the silver underneath." Achan knew he was busted. God had revealed to Joshua who had done this. He'd taken gold, he'd taken silver, he'd taken a Babylonian robe.